Hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Indivisible Town Hall. My name is Stephen Cox. I host the Washington State Indivisible podcast. I will be your host and moderator tonight. Before we get started, a big thank you to Kat Pipkin with the Washington Indivisible Network and also Julie Andrzejewski with Indivisible Tacoma. Thanks also to Shelley Mortensen and Anita Dietrich. And thank you to all of you, of course, for joining us tonight, whether you're joining us live or are joining us via Facebook or are one of the hundreds of people listening through the podcast or the terrestrial radio stations that Washington carries the podcast through. We are so glad that you are all with us tonight. So tonight, we're going to be speaking with three candidates for representative from the 44th Legislative District. This is a district that includes Snohomish, Mill Creek, Lake Stevens, and Marysville. So here's how we're going to do this tonight. We will begin by spending about 20 minutes with Representative Lovick, who is representative in position 1. He is the sole Democrat running in his race. And then we will spend the remainder of the hour with Ann Anderson and April Berg, who are both Democrats running in position 2. So as I said, let's begin with John Lovick. He first served as representative from 1999 to 2007, and then again since 2016 to present. He also recently served as interim Speaker of the House. He has been a member of the Mill Creek City and Snohomish County Councils, serving as the Snohomish County Executive from 2013 to 2015. Additionally, Representative Lovick has served Snohomish County as Snohomish County Sheriff and has been a sergeant with the Washington State Patrol since 1997. Representative Lovick, welcome to you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And when you listen, as I'm listening to you, the listeners are probably thinking this guy can't find a job that he likes anywhere. I hope they don't think that. I absolutely love what I've had the opportunity to do. I'm honored to serve in the legislature, tremendously honored to have served in other positions, but I'm really glad to be here. And I want to recognize Anita and members of Indivisible. So thanks for having me.
You're so welcome. And quite to the contrary, I think when people hear your CV, they're very impressed. The breadth of your experience, I think, speaks volumes. And, you know, given your experience both in law enforcement and also as a legislator, I would love to start this evening by getting your response to the murder of George Floyd by law enforcement officers and the protests and the uprisings that have followed in the subsequent weeks. Because you wrote an op-ed in the Everett Herald where you give your perspective both as someone who grew up Black in America and also as somebody who has worked in law enforcement. I wonder if we could just begin by having you share some of your thoughts from that piece.
Well, I'll just start by saying when you look at the murder, and that's exactly what it was, when you look at the murder of George Floyd, and then you look at just how the man was treated, I just can't get my head away from the fact that I'm looking at an officer with his hand in his pocket, with his glasses on top of his head, with his left knee on George Floyd's neck. And it was just like a walk in the park for him. Now, I spent 31 years in law enforcement. I'm sorry, almost 4 decades, but 31 years as a state trooper. And I'm telling you, when you get in a battle with a suspect or a person you are arresting, it's not that casual. It's not, you don't put your hands on the top of your head. You don't look around at the crowd like there's nothing going on. But you know what? It opened a lot of eyes, Stephan. And I think what people are seeing, pretty much what a lot of people had said before. And I like what one guy said. He said, we're not having more incidents. It's just being recorded now. And so my thoughts are, it's going to be a game changer with respect to how we do law enforcement, but it has to I'm troubled, just tremendously troubled by what I saw in that video and what I'm seeing now in other situations around the country. But also let me just say this, also hopeful, because I'm hopeful with what I'm seeing with respect to how people are addressing this and how we are, we wouldn't be in this conversation, I don't believe, but people are looking at this and saying, it's time for us to do something different, and this is the time that we're going to get it done.
I really want to have that conversation about systemic change. But before we move on from that, I just want to encourage everybody to read this op-ed. It is extraordinary. I will also mention that April Berg, whom we'll be talking with shortly, also wrote an op-ed for the Herald, and Kat will provide a link to both of those in the chat for everybody. So as I mentioned, the nation is now talking about, and you mentioned as well, major changes in law enforcement. And I would like to get your perspective on how you see the state's role in terms of oversight of law enforcement. And here's where I'd like to begin. You prime sponsored two pieces of legislation that I think are particularly salient. The first was HB 1767. That creates a law enforcement grant program to expand alternatives to arrest and jail processes. The governor signed this in law in 2019. What does that do specifically?
Basically what it does is we decided we would look and see what were we arresting people for. If we were arresting, and we were arresting a lot of people for nonviolent offenses, and we decided that we needed to have an alternative to arrest, find ways to get them the care and the treatment they need. I was a state trooper for 31 years, and I saw more than a few times we would arrest someone, take that person to jail. By the time you finished your report, they were back out doing the same thing. So this allowed us to have some alternatives to really look out and see what are some of the things that we can do. What are some of those offenses? I lost the screen. I hope you can still hear me.
Yes, we still have you.
Okay, what are some of those offenses that we can actually go out and do things for people to help them get the care and treatment they need and keep them from getting arrested, so that it won't be this revolving door, arrested, in and out of jail. And that was the idea behind the legislation.
Can you give us a sense of how it's been implemented and how it's working?
Well, what we decided to do was we actually, with the budget being what it is and what it was then, we didn't have the resources to put the money into it. But the Snohomish County, previous sheriff of Snohomish County, had a nice program to help with this. And so we feel it's working fine. But the beauty of it is that it is the law of the state, and it will always be the law of the state. And it's just going to be a matter of us getting dollars into it. And with the budget that we're dealing with now, it's difficult to get the dollars there, but we will eventually do it, because we're creating a lot of, you can always pass legislation, but eventually you have to fund it. But the fact that we're able to pass this and help communities out, it's working well, but it's going to work much, much better.
Yeah, certainly budget issues are top of mind for everybody in the legislature right now, I'm certain. And I think in terms of implementation of pieces of of bills like this and things that have been signed into law, I suspect that implementation will become more critical as things progress. I would like to also touch on another bill that you introduced called Collecting Information Regarding Police Use of Deadly Force. This was in January you introduced this. This is obviously something of very clear importance. And to the best of my knowledge, you can correct me if I'm wrong, this did not make it out of committee. What does this bill propose?
No, it actually did.
Okay.
The bill, we actually passed the bill out of the House, and it kind of stalled in the Senate. And it's going to be one of the first pieces of legislation that we will pass when we return to Olympia in January. It basically went through a process of collecting the data, the use of force data from agencies, because right now we have no mechanism to do that, to say, tell us how many cases of use of force cases you have, going to every single agency and having them provide that information to the Criminal Justice Training Center. And they would monitor this through an organization called WASPC, Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs. And I was disappointed. I worked it as hard as I could. We had a short 60-day session. We passed it out of the House, I think unanimously, and then it stalled in the Senate. And that happens occasionally. A lot of pieces of legislation, the other two members who will be trying to become legislators, you'll find that it takes a lot of work to get it through. But I've done the legwork that I need to do to it's teed up and ready to go. But we will do this. And now more than ever, we need to know about the level of use of force. How many cases are, right now we have nothing to tell us how many cases of use of force of the 300 plus agencies we have in our state.
And why is that? Can you give us some insight into why there's been such impediment into getting information about something as basic as police using deadly force?
So it's just a matter of just being able to collect the data. And I think that's been the drawback. If you remember, the second president, John Adams, said that facts are stubborn things. And when you get the facts, when you can walk out there and say, these are how many cases, these are how many arrests we made, this is the race, sex, gender of the person we arrested, these are how many cases of use of force, that will give us the facts that we need to make decisions on how we implement, how we pass legislation in our state. And so I have no idea why it hadn't happened. And I looked around, just traveling around the state. I'm with an organization called Council of State Government, and you travel around the state, around the country, and you see what other states are doing. And I said, it's something we need to do here. Had a lot of support getting it out of the House of Representatives. It just stalled in the Senate. And that's not unusual, but it's not going to happen again.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, I would imagine that it will probably have a much better chance in the next session.
Oh, it's ready to go. As a matter of fact, I've had a couple of conversations with the governor's staff, and I've shared with them, you know, there are times that you go to Olympia and you say, this is my take-home legislation. Everything that I sponsor is my take-home legislation, but this is going to be my take-home legislation. We are going to get this done.
I want to ask about another bill that you passed along these lines. This was in 2018. It was a bill creating mental health response teams. Now, we've heard this discussed as something that potentially should be taken off the list of things that police officers have to respond to. Tell us a little bit about what that bill does.
So let me just take you back, and I hope we have the time. So one day I was up at a men's shelter cooking meals for them. And I looked out and I saw what looked to be a fight, a real dispute between a couple of people, a couple of homeless people at this shelter. And as I'm watching this, I'm there deep frying my turkeys. And as I'm watching this, I saw an officer drive up. I recognized the officer, but I didn't recognize the passenger in the car. And so I kept doing what I was doing. And then I noticed that the officer stood back, didn't do what I probably would have done in my younger days. The officer stood back and made sure that he monitored what was going on, but he let the person in the car. Well, she was a mental health professional. She walked up and spent time talking to the two people, and the two people who were probably in a fight probably could have been arrested. Their licenses were not taken. They were not handcuffed and taken away, but someone came and gave them the care and the treatment that they need. So I was quite impressed with that. I looked around the state, didn't see anything like that in place. I looked, several cities had it. And then I looked around the country and I saw that other places in the country had mental health field professionals going out with their law enforcement officers. Now, I am not saying that this is something that we will be able to continue doing, but what we were able to do with the legislation was to make sure that a person living in our community with mental illness, the jail is not the place for them. And I wanted to make sure that we did that. So we had field professionals go out with our law enforcement officers and help engage them so that we would prevent an arrest and get them to the care and treatment that they need. And I know it's working well. It allowed us to put teams together, to put money into different teams. Snohomish County, maybe other counties, several cities in each county can get together and put these teams together. And I understand it's working well.
I will just ask you generally, do you feel like we've just run down a number of pieces of legislation that you've either passed or had a real impact on? Do you feel like your position as someone with a law enforcement background helps in passing these sorts of bills on police reform?
You know, I do. Stephan, I'll tell you why. You know, we have a citizen legislature, and the beauty of a citizen legislature is you draw people from all walks of life in the community. I went to Olympia years ago, and I remember when I first started, we didn't have a primary seatbelt bill. Well, I was a state trooper, and I was going to literally hundreds of collisions where people were flying out of the car because they didn't have a seatbelt on. They were required to wear one, but it wasn't primary. So I explained it to the members, and we passed a primary seatbelt bill. Didn't pass with a lot of votes, 54 in the House, just 25 in the Senate. But within a year, we reduced the number of deaths just by several hundred. And I found out that many people who didn't vote for it, many of my friends, and I don't hold it against them, but they didn't vote for it, but they were going out around the communities bragging about the primary seatbelt bill that passed the legislature. So being in my position, it gives me just a tremendous opportunity to do a lot of things that other people can't do. It's just like that doctor, that nurse, that other person who serves. Citizen legislature is really a tremendous way to go. And I like to say I have a good voice and people listen to me, and I can speak from experience, and that helps a lot.
Well, as somebody who's made his living with his voice for the last 20 years, you have a tremendous voice. I will tell you that. You're a great speaking voice.
So do you.
Thank you very much. I want to talk a little bit before, in the time that we have left, I'd like to talk about your response to COVID. Much of the pandemic has happened after the legislation, the impact rather of the pandemic happened after the legislation adjourned, but you jumped in onto something right away. You drafted legislation in late April called the Statewide Pandemic Preparation Task Force, and you've already managed to get 25 signatures on this. What's in this bill?
So let me just say this. You probably know I love the military, and I love quoting Dwight Eisenhower. And Dwight Eisenhower said, plans are worthless, but planning is everything. And basically what he was talking about is you can have a plan that sits on the shelf and does nothing, goes nowhere, and then it will be nothing once the disaster takes place. So when we left the legislature, I knew we were dealing with this pandemic. I just literally came home the first day and started planning to draft the legislation to tell us the legislation is basically, kind of in a nutshell, is going to look back and say what went right, what went wrong, and what we must do better. And there are so many things that we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at things like extending expiration of license, working at ways to boost healthcare programs, automatic hazard pay, looking at having a task force together, a volunteer task force of emergency responders to go into communities, and not one size doesn't fit all. We'll go into one community and maybe it's not as bad there, but we can have our own supply of PPE. But it's a deep bill, and I shared it with members of the legislature, literally drove to different places when I could get out of the house. I drove to different places around the state, and I'm normally pleased if I got 5 signatures on a bill before I dropped it. We're not close to dropping this bill, and the first 25 people that I talked to signed on to the bill because they know we need to be planning for the next disaster, because the next disaster is going to happen.
And this is something that is going to be presented in the 2021 session, most likely, and not during the emergency session?
Well, this is an interesting thing. I'm a good friend with the Speaker of the House, and she's set up a pretty tight criteria as to what we can present this year. And I'm pretty stubborn myself. I'm one of these guys that I don't give up, so I'm going to keep talking with her and try and get her to give us a hearing. And the beauty of it is this: there's a section that I put in the bill to allow donations from organizations. And can you imagine when we know we need to do this, to go to Amazon, to go to the Boeing company, to go to Microsoft, to go to Starbucks and say, we need resources to help us have our own PPE, to have this community do this. So we think, and I'm trying to present it to her like that, because I know we need to do something, because I don't want to wait until October, November, December, and when we have something else happen and we're having to shut down all of the schools, shut down all of the businesses. This will give us a chance to, like Eisenhower said, plans are worthless, but planning is everything. Be planning for the next disaster, because we think it's going to come.
Well, speaking of planning, what are some of your other priorities for next session?
Well, you know, my mantra during the entire time that I have served in the legislature has been to have good schools, good safe roads, and good jobs with benefits. We're going to continue with that one, but I'm going to be working a tremendous amount of time with the Public Safety Committee, because we are going to address this issue that we're dealing with respect to police use of force. And I can't say all the things that we're doing. I have a long meeting tomorrow. We were on a Zoom call today for probably 3 hours on a Zoom call. We're going to do this because, you know, our nation is so divided right now. And I will be the first to tell you, I know hundreds of police officers, and I can tell you this: 99.9% of these brave men and women go to work every day to do the job, to protect the community, to honor their oath. And we're going to make sure that they get to do their job. We're also going to find a way to hold those who are not doing the job properly, hold those who are mistreating other people, hold those who are not doing the job well, hold them accountable. And that's going to be a huge part of what we're going to do. And that's starting right now.
Representative Lovick, I just want to thank you for your time. And before we let you go, I'll just ask, where can people learn more about your campaign?
The website is electjohnlovick.com. That'll get them to us.
Okay, cool. Kat will have that information for everybody in the chat. Can't thank you enough for joining us tonight. Thank you for all you're doing.
I'm glad to be here, and I'm looking forward to my 2 friends on the other line.
Well, that's where we're going to go straight away. So we will now move on to our discussion with Ann Anderson and April Berg, who are both Democrats running for position 2. So this is how this portion is going to go. We are going to be asking each candidate a series of platform and audience questions. And as Kat mentioned at the top, because of our limited time, we're not going to get to as many audience questions as I would like. However, we are asking each candidate to limit their answers to 90 seconds. I'm going to be timing on my end, and I'm going to prompt the candidates when it's time to wrap up their answers. If they can see me, I'll wave a pen. I will encourage both of our candidates to not use the full 90 seconds if they don't need to. We will do our best to get to every question that comes through. But like I said, we received a lot of questions today, so those have been incorporated. If you submitted a question today, it likely has been incorporated into the program. I'm also just going to stress before we begin that even though the candidates are running for the same position, tonight will not be a debate. We are instead looking for each candidate to clarify her stances on specific issues, but we're just asking that there be no point counterpoint. So with that, we will meet our candidates. Ann Anderson is the Executive Director of Victim Support Services and is former Executive Director of the Lake Stevens Community Food Bank. April Berg is School Board Director for the Everett School District, and she also serves on the Mill Creek Planning Commission. Ann Anderson and April Berg, welcome to you both.
Hi, thank you.
Hi, thanks so much.
Thank you. So Ann Anderson, let's begin with you. Kindly introduce yourself and talk about some personal experiences and achievements that you feel have prepared you for the job of representative.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Thanks for this opportunity. As you said, my name is Ann Anderson. I am currently the Executive Director of the state's largest crime victims advocacy center. We run the Washington State Crime Victims Hotline and help people who have been victimized by crime. Most of the staff are social workers. In addition to the hotline, we also offer mental health services. Prior to that, I was the executive director of a food bank and the chair of the advocacy committee. I spent a lot of time and still do advocating for anti-poverty, the different poverty alleviation measures, both in the state and federal level. I was a member of RAC, which is the Western Region Anti-Hunger Consortium. We help to ensure that that anti-poverty measures are kept in the Farm Bill. I advocated for years for breakfast after the bell. We finally did that. So, and all sorts of other work, mostly, like I said, in the anti-poverty arena. And I've been really just my entire life, my entire career has been dedicated to helping my community in one way or another. So mostly through nonprofit and small business consulting.
April Berg, let's turn to you next. Give us an introduction, if you will, and talk about some of your personal experiences and achievements that you feel have prepared you for the job of representative.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. So I'm April Berg, and I am currently a school board director for the Everett School District. I am also a planning commissioner for the City of Mill Creek. The other hats I wear are a trustee for Seattle Children's Theater, and I'm also on the Snohomish County Juvenile Justice Cultural Competency Board. As you know, one of the high schools in Everett School District was one of the first to have a COVID positive student in the nation. We were the first one. So I was a part of that effort to shut down the school safely and move learning to at-home learning. But I also asked a lot of questions of what can we do for families? And that meant what can we do in terms of technology needs, in terms of food security, in terms of emergency childcare. And because of the answers we got back to those questions, we have provided over 150,000 meals to students. We provided thousands of laptops and hotspots that students will be able to keep through the summer if they so choose. They can continue that learning at home. And we also provided emergency childcare. That's the type of leadership that I'm hoping to bring forward in this next season of service. I'm also, just so folks know, a former small business owner. I used to own the Edmonds Inn Bed and Breakfast. So I really understand what it takes to be a small business owner and to be a champion for one. I've walked a mile in their shoes. I'm a former program manager for Boeing. So I really understand aerospace and the importance of that to the community. And I think all of those things just gives me the background of the 44th. My experience really shows the 44th.
Thank you to both of you for that. We'll move on to platform questions right now. And I'd like to begin those by talking about the Black Lives Matter protest in Snohomish. So as many people in the 44th know, on May 31st, armed militias made up largely of white men, many of whom are affiliated with white supremacist groups, gathered in Snohomish, ostensibly to confront so-called Antifa demonstrators who ultimately never materialized. But some of the men in the militia did assault peaceful protesters, Former Police Chief Keith Rogers has been criticized for failing to take action and for calling the events, quote, festive. And Anderson, let's begin with you. How do you believe local law enforcement should have handled this situation?
Yeah, thank you. In scenarios like these, people openly brandishing guns make many Washingtonians feel really uncomfortable. And I think particularly in this case, can and did lead to dangerous conflict between armed citizens and protesters later. So, while Washington has stronger gun rights in our Constitution than we do federally, and open carry is legal, it is illegal to open carry a firearm in any manner which manifests an intent to intimidate another or warrant alarm for the safety of other persons. So I don't believe this was a festive occasion. Law enforcement's top priority in these situations is to diffuse the situation without people getting hurt and to enforce the law, including the intimidation part. So I guess that's my take on that.
Then same question to you, April Berg. How do you believe law enforcement should have handled the Black Lives Matter protest and the militias situation that happened on May 31st?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I was actually out there the day before the armed militia was out there. So I was at the peaceful protest on that Saturday. It was love, it was peace, it was tons of support from the community. It was hundreds of people. It was amazing. It sounds like because of that, the next day there was this armed kind of, we're going to protect the downtown. Law enforcement dropped the ball. There was no Antifa, conversations about coming to get the downtown Snohomish area or anything like that. And I think in some ways law enforcement really kind of, that specific law enforcement really kind of inflamed it. And by them allowing folks to open carry and brandish in that manner, in a very intimidating manner, it was a message to the citizens, especially to the citizens of color, which is that you're not welcome. And so I believe that the former chief that allowed that to happen was wrong. The community spoke out at a multi-hour city council meeting about it. And it was heartbreaking to listen to the kiddos talk about their experiences and how they felt and how this was just kind of the cherry on top of the sundae of racism that they had experienced sometimes in the schools and sometimes within that community. And so, but that's not who Snohomish is. And so that's part of what broke my heart, is that I know that city is full of loving, amazing people who unfortunately had that situation happen and inflamed by law enforcement. And it was seen, it was just heartbreaking.
I would like to continue on with the discussion that Representative Lovick and I were having about the protests and the uprisings in response to the murder of George Floyd that have sparked a lot of debate about the role of police oversight. And I would like to ask both of you, and April Berg, let's start with you, what you believe the state's role is, and specifically the state legislature's role is and or should be in holding police accountable.
So the state legislature definitely has a role, and part of that, and I'm so happy to hear, John, about some of the bills that he's passed that talk about that accountability, understanding where use of force is used, understanding really what the data says. And I think as a legislature, we have a responsibility for collecting that data and having local jurisdictions be really responsible for the forces that they oversee. And I think it's bigger than that too. I think that we have a responsibility to our school districts with SROs and having some type of consistent messaging and training around that, and the fact that those folks shouldn't be used as your first line of safety for schools. I think it's a really big, broad conversation with a lot of intersections, and I believe the legislature has the ability to affect that positively by moving forward with many of the measures that Representative Lovick has attempted to pass before, as well as other ones that I see coming out from other sitting legislators.
I could just get a clarification from you. You mentioned SROs. I imagine those are officers in the school. What does that stand for?
Safety resource officers.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. And then the same question goes to you, and Anderson. How do you see the state's role, and specifically the legislature's role, in holding police accountable?
Yeah, I think recent events just continue to illustrate that we have a long way to go before our criminal justice system is just. I currently serve on the board of a university school of criminal justice. And much of my time there is focused on how law enforcement and our criminal justice system as a whole can be improved and more effective and equitable. And we can ensure that current and future law enforcement officers and criminal justice professionals are better equipped. Washington State voters approved Initiative 940 in 2018, which increased accountability for police and the rules around use of deadly force. Then in 2019, House Bill 1064 further strengthened that law. And as a legislator, I will continue the work that I've been doing to try to dismantle systemic problems and increase positive outcomes and accountability, as well as expand upon the work that's been done in the legislature to ensure responsibility and accountability of law enforcement agencies.
For those just joining us right now, I will say welcome. We are speaking with Ann Anderson and April Berg. They are both running for representative in position 2 for the 44th legislative district. I would like to ask both of your thoughts on hashtag defund the police. This has been interpreted in a number of ways, but broadly it calls for major changes in policing in this country. Ann Anderson, let's start with you. How do you interpret defund the police, and what changes would you specifically like to see?
Yeah, no, I agree. There's been this really large gap in, or just a whole array of different ways that people have defined it. Most do seem to agree, though, that over time, many functions have fallen to police that maybe would be better served by other people. I think it's about as much as 21% of an officer's time is spent responding to and transporting people with mental illness, for example. Police are frequently involved with the homeless population. And I think there's so much that we're asking law enforcement to do that they are not trained for. In my line of work, I spend time with law enforcement, and I've heard them asking for that. Same thing with the university board that I was telling you about. What we need to do is either give them this training that they're saying that they need and want, or give them the resources to have that outside. From an outside source. If a person calls 911 to complain about people who are homeless, for example, why can't we send rapid response social workers to provide them with support? I think a lot of what's happening is just not their job, and we need to find the correct resources.
I have a quick follow-up for you on this, and this comes from Sylvia, and she asks, would you support reallocating funds? And if so, which social services would you prioritize?
I think that that's a conversation that we need to have with law enforcement to see what it is that they are seeing most as far as which social services to prioritize. I think the really fast and easy answer to that would be just even getting the right information into their hands so that they know where they can refer people, so that they're not spending the same longer term amounts of time with people, and then figuring out the data so that we know where the resources most need to go. And as far as reallocating funding, I think it depends on yes, if we're taking taking responsibilities away from them, but I do think that it's very important that these people are working in conjunction, because you don't necessarily know what you're getting into when you're responding to a 911 call. So I have a staff of social workers, and certainly wouldn't want to send them in a potentially dangerous situation. So I think that having a scenario where they're working in conjunction is ideal.
April Berg, I'll ask the same two questions of you, and we'll go one at a time so you can respond to both. First, I'll ask you how you interpret hashtag defund the police, and what changes would you like to see?
Yeah, so so how I interpret it is really redirecting the funding. So I wouldn't put it in those words, but I would definitely say redirect, reinvent, reinvest. And what I mean by that is that we really must take funding that we have traditionally just given to police departments and redirect that funding to social services and to things that actually help people where they need it most. And so for examples, it would be substance abuse, it would be social workers, it would be housing first initiatives, all the things that you see which is the majority of the police time is spent on things where you don't need someone with a badge and a gun to show up. So redirecting those funds to where it really makes a difference in our social structure. But again, that takes reinventing. And so we have to reinvent how and what we think of for law enforcement. It really should be peacekeeping, keeping the peace. Beyond that, we need other folks in the community to support. And so again, substance abuse counselors, mental health counselors. And then, of course, just that reinvention of how we look at policing. And I think a big piece of that is demilitarization. We have police forces that are literally like little militaries. And I think that for a variety of reasons, that's become the case. So I really feel like a part of that conversation about redirecting funding also needs to be about demilitarizing the police.
You've answered Sylvia's follow-up question about how you would prioritize reallocating funds, but since Anne did get an extra turn there, is there anything you'd like to say additionally?
Well, I would say too, is that this particular conversation touches on a lot of intersections, right? So we're looking now at the intersection of law enforcement as well, and healthcare and housing and mental health. And so I think as we look at all of the things that is happening right now in our society with the pandemic and with inequities, and now with racial biases and just real unrest because of it, I think we need to look at all of those things intersecting and what that means. And so again, as we talk about redirecting funding from traditional police activities, how does that intersect with housing and support for folks who are in substance abuse counseling and who need mental health work? So I just want to expand the conversation and expand our thinking so that we can get to a better place.
Well, you've anticipated the next question that I have lined up, which is about racial justice, because that is at the root of all of this. So I'll ask you and begin with you, April Berg. What work specifically would you like to do at the legislative level to create a more just and equitable society, not just for people in the 44th, but for all the people of Washington?
So I think that when we look at racial bias and racial unrest, it really goes back to our basic social fabric and our social contract that was never really meant for based on people of color. And so when we look at the legislature and the laws that we pass, I think that we need to do a couple of things. One is no matter what you do in terms of policy, legislation, my role on the school board, all those policies, it's going to do something to racial justice, right? It's going to do something to equity. It's going to either mitigate, perpetuate, eliminate, or exacerbate in terms of equity. And so I think at the legislative level, we need to look at every law we pass, not just ones that deal specifically with race, but every law to know what it does to equity and what it does to inequities, and specifically what it does for racism. I think that has to be one of our paramount duties. Specifically in the legislature, I want to focus on education. That's my wheelhouse. That's where my background is. And so I want to look at really rooting out the inequities in both discipline and graduation rates for our students of color, because I believe there is a school to prison pipeline that can be affected with good, strong laws. And those laws are going to include things for transparency and accountability. I'm very data focused. And so I want to know the data. I want to understand the metrics of what's going on and where so that we can make a change. Thank you.
Thank you. Same question to you, Ann Anderson. What work specifically would you like to do at the legislative level to create a more just and equitable society, as I say, not just for people in the 44th, but for all people of Washington State?
Yeah, I agree that not only is there a lot of work to do, but these conversations need to occur, and we need to look at all legislation through that lens. Yeah, these issues are systemic, and we need system-wide change in order to combat them. I think working on legislation with these goals in mind will decrease the disparities that affect the lives of people of color in our community, and really lift everyone up in the community. We can make progress on our most pressing issues, including housing affordability, healthcare, and education disparities, food insecurities, stymied wage growth, justice and equality in our society should be framed in such a way that everyone can see the benefit to their neighbors. So I think really the key is, with every single piece of legislation, every single conversation is ensuring that that it's being looked at through a lens of social justice and racial justice.
I would like to shift next and talk about the economic recovery. As we know, Governor Inslee has recently begun a phased reopening of the state's economy, but the recovery is projected to take many years. Ann Anderson, let's stay with you on this. How would you work to make sure that individuals and small businesses specifically get the help that they need to recover in the 44th LD?
Yeah, I think far too frequently the focus is on Wall Street rather than Main Street, as cliche as that is. But really, our small businesses were hit very hard, and our economy was hit very hard. Our families are suffering. And fortunately, what's best for individuals and small businesses is what's needed for economic recovery. Investments in small business ensure that money is earned, spent, and stays here locally. And investments in infrastructure that can create living wage jobs will help to get families back on track financially. Then also ensuring that we're investing in human services. There are huge intersections and an excellent return on investment with certain human services funding. For example, one that I've used a lot of times is a Western Washington University study that shows that for every $1 you spend in food security measures, $12 comes back to the local economy. So I think those are kind of the three different focuses, and all of those will put money back into the pockets of local people who will then spend it, and particularly lower and mid-level wage income earners then spend their money, pay for sales tax, and we have more money to to use. So.
Okay. April Berg, same question to you. How would you make sure as a legislator that individuals and small businesses get the help that they need in the 44th?
Yeah, so this pandemic has presented some unique challenges, and of course it's highlighted some unique inequities. One of the things that I would do is ensure that there's a level playing field for small businesses and big businesses. As I talk with constituents across our district, there's a lot of frustration about two sets of playing rules, right? So you've got big box stores, for example, selling things that our local farmers market are being told that we can't sell, and that's not okay. And so I think from that perspective, I think there needs to be a little bit more oversight in terms of how we're applying the rules for reopening and eventually recovering. The other piece of it is consumer confidence. We can do everything that we want to do, in terms of opening and reopening and putting out guidelines, but if folks don't feel safe doing them, then that's a whole nother issue. And I think from a legislative perspective that we can do things in our districts, and we can encourage locally the right thing to be done in terms of reopening safely. So that means depending on what phase you're in and what type of PPE you're using as a job. But lastly, I think the big picture is how do we get everybody back working? And so you really need to look at innovation, investment, and infrastructure. And infrastructure to me is the key piece of it, because that's going to affect big business, small business, local construction workers. And infrastructure with a capital I means everything from your traditional construction projects all the way to broadband, and making sure that we've got no digital deserts in our area.
Let's move next to healthcare, because this is related. The pandemic has shown real weaknesses in our for-profit healthcare system, especially as is shown with insurance that's tied to people's employment. And Anderson, let's begin with you. I'm sorry, April, pardon me, let's stay with you for this one. Do you support universal single-payer healthcare for all Washingtonians? And if so, how would you like to get there?
So I do support it. I think I believe healthcare is a human right. It's a non-negotiable human right. And one of the ways I think we need to get there are having those conversations that you just alluded to, which is having your healthcare tied to your employment is not a winning formula. So we really need to move the ball forward. I think this pandemic is allowing us to have conversations with folks. I've had those conversations with folks who are queuing up for employment security, very, very nervous about getting that check, not realizing that they've just had a qualifying event where they also need to queue up for our state-supported healthcare system because they will no longer have their employee healthcare within 60 days. So I think we need to have that conversation. I think that we need to move the ball forward in terms of looking at some creative progressive revenue structures that will allow us to get to healthcare for all in our state. And I, as a legislator, will be very open to looking at that. Again, it's moving that dial, cranking it piece by piece, but we gotta get there. It is an absolute human right.
And then just a quick yes or no to you. As I'm sure you're aware, Indivisible has pushed very hard for Medicare for all. Do you support Medicare for all?
I do support Medicare for all.
Ann Anderson, let's turn to you. Do you support universal single-payer healthcare for all Washingtonians? And if so, how would you like to get there?
Yeah, thank you. I do support universal quality healthcare coverage for all Washingtonians. As a survivor of domestic abuse, I stayed with my abuser because I was concerned about my family not having healthcare. And it's really frustrating to be, simultaneously endangering yourself and worried about your children while trying to protect them. So I know, as well as anyone, what access to healthcare means to people in our state. As a matter of fact, it means enough to me that I have not taken any campaign contributions from health insurance companies. I don't think that should be in the way of getting this done. I have faced some criticism about this topic because I won't sit here and say, hey, I can make this happen tomorrow. Or in this first year. I will not, I'm really big on under promise, over deliver. I will not promise something that I can't deliver. But I absolutely will take every opportunity to increase access and affordability to quality health care for all Washingtonians. Sorry, was there?
No, please continue.
Okay.
Yeah, you have a few more seconds.
Okay, I've been endorsed by Washington State Nurses Association and I'm excited to work with them to find cost-saving measures within our system. Also, I think a very important consideration immediately is the expansion of Apple Health to protect lower-income families and their children. Currently, a family of 4 making $75,000 a year qualifies for supplemental health care, but the cost of living here, the minimum cost of living just to get by in our area is $89,000 a year, and I think we need to immediately close that gap.
I will put the same yes or no question to you that I put to April Berg. As you know, Indivisible has pushed very hard for Medicare for all. Do you support it?
Yes, profiting off the misfortune and illness of others is immoral.
Let's turn next to the climate. And April Berg, we'll start with you on this. In May of last year, Governor Inslee signed a law requiring the state transition to 100% clean energy by 2045. This is in line with global commitments as well. As a representative, what would you do to meet that goal?
So that's a great question. And I wholeheartedly support his initiative. For me, it's clean fuel standards needs to be the first step. We need to be with our folks in the region who have passed it, Oregon, especially. It's something that we need to get there. I think in addition to that, there's a lot of things that we can do as a community to get to those goals by 2045. And I think for me, again, looking at that education hat, looking at our kiddos, looking at just really good habits and good way, putting good, I guess habits is the best word. I'm losing that word, but looking at composting. I was just today had a whole show on environmental priorities and how they're still important even during this pandemic. And that was one thing we kind of went on this rabbit trail of like, that's so important. Waste is a huge thing. And as we saw with COVID, when we had our transfer stations shut down, we all of a sudden had more folks burning their trash. And we had this huge environmental thing of like, wait, what? Like we have have people burning things. And so now, that was up to localities to say, look, reopen the waste transfer stations because we can't have folks burning their trash. So I think there's a lot of ways to get there, but we have to have a lot of conversations, and some of them begin as simply and as basically as, what do we do with our waste? But clean fuel standards for me would be a #1 place to start as a legislator.
And then let's move on next to something that I know is very important to both of you, and that's affordable housing. As in other parts of the state, the 44th is experiencing an affordable housing crisis. All of a sudden it's occurring to me, Ann Anderson, did I give you a chance to answer the question about climate? I did not, did I?
No.
I apologize. I was just about ready to move on, and I thought I didn't get to Ann on this one. Okay, so I will ask you, in terms of Governor Inslee's law requiring the state to transition to 100% clean energy by 2045, what would you as a representative do to help us meet that goal?
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited to tackle this issue. It's in order to achieve 100% clean energy, really, it's such a short time, everything has to be on the table and at least considered. But I think we need to incentivize businesses and individuals who do the work of retrofitting their homes and places of business, electric vehicle incentives, new green energy infrastructure projects. All of these will help. We won't be able to hit the goals without making serious progress toward our largest source of carbon emissions, which is our transportation. So this is really a point of intersection in our communities. I know you're about to talk about housing, so maybe, but this kind of ties in, as the cost of housing has risen and wage growth has stayed stagnant, we are spending a lot of time commuting. And so we need to ensure that there are a better supplies of housing in places that are transportation hubs, in places where we can work and do business. Ensure that people can shorten their commutes. This pandemic has also shown that many people can work from home. And so I think, figuring out what we can do to continue that as much as possible will be very helpful as well.
You did anticipate the next question because I mentioned the next question, but I think there's probably more that you can add to this. So we do know that the 44th is experiencing an affordable housing crisis, as are many other regions in our state. So I will put this to you first, Ann Anderson. How do you create more affordable housing while balancing, as you say, environmental concerns and also regional growth concerns?
Yeah, I did kind of start to talk about that prior, but it has become a major challenge, and we need to expand programs like the Housing Trust Fund to ensure that working families can live near employment centers. And we need to focus our growth where transportation and infrastructure is available to get people where they need to be, to school, to work. Really, we can't successfully solve this problem without an increased supply of housing and a focus on living wage jobs. It's frustrating to know that there are people in our community who are working 2 and 3 jobs and are struggling to keep a roof over their heads. So it needs to be addressed on all sides. But a big portion of that is ensuring that people have access to transportation so that they can get to work. And that means growth in areas where there are logical hubs. Also, that will help with food deserts and all sorts of other things that come from having to commute. So,
April, Berg, same question to you, and it is a large and interconnected question, as Ann Anderson is alluding to. How do we create more affordable housing while also managing to balance things like environmental and growth concerns?
Absolutely. And I will say I'm really happy to be the sole endorsed candidate for both the Sierra Club as well as the Washington Conservation Voters. And those were this question specifically were things that I addressed with them. It's a tough problem. We need more housing. We need more affordable housing. And one of the answers is density. And it's in density in places potentially that aren't used to seeing more density, but we have to do it smart and we have to do it green. And there are absolutely ways to get that done. In addition to that, we need to look at local jurisdictions in terms of some of the local ordinances that impact density and really preclude the availability of workforce housing. I call it workforce housing because really we're talking about housing our entry-level teachers and doctors or teachers and nurses and firefighters. And sometimes the conversation gets a little NIMBY, not in my backyard when we talk about who we're housing and where. So specifically in my community, I have fought for workforce housing. I've spoken, advocated for that because I think that's where we need to go. But accessory dwelling units, ADUs, I think are a big piece of it, allowing folks to have a little more density on their own personal property. There's lots of ways to get there, but yes, fully funding the affordable the housing trust fund is huge and necessary and cannot be forgotten, even though we are going to be coming out of a pandemic soon. But this has to be done green, and we have to put infrastructure, housing infrastructure first. Thanks.
We are running somewhat short on time here, but there are some very important questions that I want to get to, not least of which is education. The state is projected to have terrible budget shortfalls in 2021, in part because of our regressive tax system, but also because of the fallout from the pandemic. April Berg, where should the money come from to fund our schools? And what programs will you prioritize? Let's go with you first, because as you say, you're Everett School Board Director.
Yes, and so education, as you know, in our state is a paramount duty. The majority of our education funding is constitutionally protected, and that's an awesome thing. Unfortunately, the prototypical school funding model does not reflect the accurately how our schools are actually run. So that, regardless of the pandemic, needs to be updated so that we are actually funding what we need, which are counselors, which are added support services for our kiddos. I really do want to focus on our regressive tax structure. I really do not want to cut our noses off to spite our face and move into austerity because of this crisis. The crisis is highlighting inequities, and I believe this is an opportunity to reset the table, and that our state's budget needs to reflect our values. And as we know, in this state, we value education. So I simply am not going to say we need to cut this and we need to cut that and then everything's going to be fine, because that's just not the case. We have a regressive tax structure that if we could just get on the road to progressive, if we could just start turning that dial a bit, we would not have to have conversations about what are we going to take away, what are we going to slash and burn. It is all important. Our kids are important. Education's a paramount duty, but it's also, I believe, a basic human right that we must protect.
A quick follow-up comes from Sean. We'll stay with you on this, April. Do you support lowering to a simple majority school district bond passage? Right now, I believe it requires a 2/3 vote. It
does. And thank you, Sean, out there for asking that question. And I think that we need to move to a simple majority for capital bond passage. Our communities need these schools. Our communities are voting in the majority to have schools supported with capital projects. And we need to go to a simple majority to get it done. Thank you for that question.
And Anderson, back to you. Where do you feel the money should come from to fund our schools, given the state of sort of parallel crisis that we're in right now? And what programs would you prioritize?
Yeah, thank you. I do agree and have advocated for years for changes. Washington State does have the most regressive tax system in the nation. We are ranked 50th, unfortunately, because all of our funding comes from sales tax, and people who make less money spend more of their money than those who have money to save. People at the who earn less are spending a much higher percentage of their tax or of their money on taxes. So we do need to address that, and I think elimination of corporate tax loopholes is something that we need to look at, absolutely. And then ensuring that, again, with living wage jobs, if people are making enough money, again, they are spending more money, they're paying more into paying more sales tax, paying more into our system, and that does help with our budget. And as far as school goes, like, yes, absolutely. It is a paramount duty to fund our schools. They will be funded. And, I think alleviating some of that pain with looking at corporate tax loopholes will be helpful.
I will ask Sean's follow-up question to you as well. Do you support lowering a school district bond passage to a simple majority?
Yes, I have worked on school bonds and levies for districts that my kids don't even attend school in, because I know the importance of that and of helping some of the schools that have a harder time passing those. So if there's a way to make that easier, it's in everyone's best interest. It's very important for kids, and it's also an economic benefit to everyone. So.
A few more audience questions before you go, and we'll stay with you on this. Does your campaign accept corporate donations, and if so, which corporations?
I suppose that would depend. For example, my family owns a small cattle ranch, and that's a corporation. And I would happily take their money. Hi, Mom, I hope you're listening. Yeah, I think that that's just a really difficult question to ask, because I think the idea that someone says, when somebody talks about corporation, I think there are different ideas about what that could mean. So yes, I'm okay with taking money from business, but like I said before, I am the candidate in this race who did refuse to take, for example, corporate money from health insurance companies. So I guess I realize the correct answer is no, but but it just depends on the business, because
Okay, April Berg, same question to you. Does your campaign accept corporate donations, and if so, which corporations?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so for my campaign, I am not accepting any fossil fuel money or any money from polluters. That is one of the things that I signed that pledge early on in the campaign. But I have taken corporate money. I guess that's the best way to put it. I'm very selective, and I have a very big filter that I place that through in terms of corporations. And I have told a few of them, like, no, that's a non-starter for me. And again, with the fossil fuels, any polluters, tobacco, any of that stuff. I will say that I want to get corporate money out of politics so badly. And I really want to be an advocate in Olympia for the voters. And so I think that as we go through this election cycle, and any election cycle, the more we can get corporate money out of politics would be awesome. And I am looking forward to hopefully being a legislator and figuring out how to do that. Haven't figured it out yet as Citizen X running for this office.
Let's stay with you on this next question, April. Sylvia asks, how will you support undocumented people who are excluded from federal aid during the COVID pandemic?
That's a great question. And honestly, I believe that we need to be supporting our undocumented folks in our communities the same way we are supporting our community. I don't like that distinguishing that line that we make and say, oh, you're documented or undocumented, so you get support and you don't. Everybody's here, we're part of one community, and we're being hit by a pandemic. So I would advocate for the same support. I know California has done some inventive things in terms of getting money directly to those workers and to those families, and I would be support of that as well. I will tell you, as a school board director, that's one thing that we think about all the time, is how our schools are safe spaces. They are places for folks to get education, get what they need, and really we protect them as much as we can. And I want to bring that same emphasis, that same compassion with me to Olympia.
Same question to you, Ann. How will you support undocumented people who are excluded from federal aid during the COVID pandemic?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly that everyone here deserves access to whatever help they need. We're in this together, so.
Actually, I think we have time for just a couple more questions here. Anita Dietrich, who is founder of Snohomish County Indivisible, asks, income disparities negatively impact whether a person accused of a low-level crime will be incarcerated until their trial. Do you support bail reform, especially in light of COVID? And let's stay with you, please.
Yes, absolutely. This is something that has been that I've been talking about and advocating for years and years. It is absolutely unfair that someone who can't afford can't afford bail is stuck in that system, because what happens is that, until their court date, they're very likely to lose their job. They can lose their homes, and before they have ever been had the opportunity for a trial, their entire life has been derailed, and they're financially ruined. Their relationships are ruined, and it's absolutely ridiculous to me that that dependent upon how much money you have, you may completely have ruined, your life may be completely ruined.
April Berg, same question to you. Do you support bail reform, especially in light of COVID-19?
Absolutely, and I supported it before COVID-19. It's awful. It is. It's a way of keeping folks incarcerated over debt. And I think that even if, and hopefully none of you have, but even if you have been through the system in terms of helping someone get out of jail, and when you go in, they set this bail amount, and you listen and you think, okay, I'm going to help this person. I'll pay this bail amount. Well, then you say, no, we won't take you. We can't take that money. You've got to go over to a bondsman, and you've got to go. And next thing you know, there's fee after fee after fee. And it's just this never ending revolving door of debt and unfortunately imprisonment as a result of it. So I absolutely do support reform, not only as a politician and as a leader, but as a citizen that has helped other citizens get out of situations that are just untenable. And it seems like the cards are stacked against them all because of bail and how it's just it just keeps them in. So yeah, I would definitely support it. Thank you.
As everybody can see, we've gone a little bit over time here. So I'm just going to ask for 60 seconds for some final thoughts and where people can go to learn more about your campaign. And Anderson, let's begin with you.
Thank you everybody for joining us and for the great questions. If you would like to learn more about our campaign, our website is www.friendsofannanderson.com. We are also on social media at Friends of Ann Anderson on Facebook, at Friends of Ann Anderson on Instagram, and at Friends of Ann on Twitter. Or just, I don't know, wave me down somewhere. But
Okay,
I would love to hear from anyone. My favorite part about all of this has been all the different insight and meeting with people and hearing all these different things. So please do reach out. I've been encouraging anyone to do that. There's also friendsofannanderson@gmail.com. So, and I'll give you a call back.
Okay. April Berg, you get the final word this evening. 60 seconds for you, and let us know where people can go to learn more about your campaign.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me on tonight. And thank you so much for everybody tuning in and for all the fabulous questions. You can find my campaign at www.aprilberg, that's aprilberg.com. I've said that a lot on phone banking lately. The other way that you can find me is by tuning in each week, each Tuesday at 3 p.m. for Kitchen Conversations, where I talk with community leaders about kitchen table issues. Today, of course, with the environment, we've covered education, we've covered healthcare. Next week, I'm super excited to let you know that we will be talking about ethnic studies as curriculum in K through 12 schooling. And we have got some amazing guests who are doing the work in that space. So I encourage folks to reach out to me via my website. You can find all my social media channels there as well. But really, but email me at april@aprilberg.com, because I do love talking to constituents, answering questions, and helping you get where you need to be. So just thank you again for having me. This has been a fabulous night.
April Berg, thank you so much. And Anderson, thank you as well. Also, thanks to Representative John Lovick. And I will mention both Ann and April, we did get a number of questions that we did not get to, so I will make sure that those get to you via your inbox. And with that, I will say thank you. I'm Stephen Cox. I host the Washington State Indivisible podcast, and I will now turn things back over to Kat and Julie for some quick announcements.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you to all of our guests. This was fabulous. For some reason, I'm not showing up, but that's okay. I'm going to just turn it directly over to Julie. Julie, why don't you come on board and let me share your slides here.
I just want to reiterate that we are very grateful to all the candidates for coming tonight. It was an extremely excellent town hall. I wanted to tell you a little bit about the town hall objectives that we have had both statewide candidates on the town halls and priority legislative districts, which can either be flipped or need to be defended. And the purpose of these is to highlight Democrats and progressives so that we can help people get involved with campaigns and understand what needs to be done to get people elected. It's only been since 2017 that we flipped the Senate with Manka Dingra's candidacy. And we have been able to pass amazing legislation since that time because we have a triumvirate. That means that the Democrats control all three components of our government. And the state elections this year are every bit as important as the national elections. Washington State has been an enormous resistance to the Trump administration. We now have the best environmental, health care, voting, and labor legislation in the country. And we need to increase our majorities in both of the houses. As the candidates pointed out, some of these things need 2/3 vote, and we need to increase Democrats in the legislature. We all can really make a difference in these campaigns. I want to just mention a couple of key facts about elections that can help guide our actions. Primaries matter. Whoever wins a primary is likely to win the general election. I learned this. This was a very big surprise to me. And direct voter contact is the most effective method to winning the elections. This year, that means phone calls. And phone calls before the primary right now can make the biggest difference. A lot of people think they're going to wait until October to take some action. But really, right now is when people need to get involved with these campaigns. And so I really urge people to get involved, to start making phone calls. It takes a little bit of effort the first few times you do it, but then it gets smoother and you get to enjoy talking with people. Ballots drop in 1 month for the primary, and 30% of the people vote within the first couple days. That means we have to get the messages to them before ballots drop. Then there 40% of the people vote within the next 2 weeks, and another 30% vote right at the end. So don't wait to get out the vote before the primary or the general elections. Get involved with campaigns right now and get these excellent candidates elected. So again, thanks to the candidates. Thanks so much to Kat Pipkin and Stephen Cox and Anita for organizing this session. And I'm going to turn it over to Anita.
Thanks, Julie. First, I'd really like to thank the Washington Indivisible Network, specifically Kat, Julie, Louise, Stefan, for all your hard work in putting this on. And next, I'd like to thank Shelley Mortensen and Tina Kennard for their hard work in researching and compiling questions. And then finally, on behalf of Snohomish County Indivisible, I'd really like to thank so much Representative Lovick, Ms. Berg, and Ms. Anderson for being here tonight and sharing a little bit about your stance on the important issues that are going to be facing Washington State as a whole and the 44th District specifically. So thank you and good luck with your campaigns.
Thank you, Anita. Thank you, guests. Thank you, everybody. You probably didn't get a chance to see that last slide since I had it up for about 1 second. We will send a follow-up email out tomorrow. It will have everybody's contact information in it. It will also have links to the podcast and video, as well as an invitation to Representative Lovick's Juneteenth event. Thanks and have a great night.
And come next week to see Chris Reichdahl on education.
Thank you, Julie. Night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Thanks a lot.